So I just wanted to get on with you, my business partner, and kind of talk about like where we came from, how we got where we're at, because it's kind of a crazy story when you think about it. Like, think about the day that we first met each other and what was going on in our lives back then. Dude, I bet if you went back and like told the version of us then that, guess what, you guys are going to be owning a million dollar business together in the future, like only a few years down the road, I bet we would have a hard time believing that, honestly.
It's been a bumpy road, but it didn't really feel bumpy while we were going through it. But considering where we're at now compared to, like you said, where we were years ago, I don't think we ever could have guessed. And for most people who probably don't know how this came to be, Riley and I the way that we met was through our wives who were friends previously. And once we had met, we were living in the same area. Both of us were going to college. Both, us and our wives were all going to college at the time. And like everybody does in Provo, we got involved with an MLM. Riley
Good
introduced
times.
us to an MLM, so I'll let you take that.
Yeah, I take full responsibility for that detour in our life trajectory. Dude, I mean, can you blame us? It's one of those classic, like, newlywed, $100 in the bank account, just broke as a joke, trying to figure out life, and then someone comes along and promises some glorious future. Like, if you just talk to people every day, go to Starbucks, go to Barnes and Noble and talk to people, you'll build a business. And it's just the most hilarious thing. Hindsight's always 2020. But yes, we did. My wife and I, we joined an MLM based around e-commerce, and we reconnected with Jake and his wife. I think we were just kind of reconnecting, and then we took the opportunity to pitch you on this, right?
Well, the reason it's important is because I don't think you and I would have ever had a relationship if it wasn't for that. And just
Right.
like, everybody in an MLM, you invite these people over for a game night or whatever it is. And so we
Always.
came over thinking it was just a normal game night. We were stoked. I hadn't even met you yet. I'm pretty sure this is the first time I met you.
Hmm.
And Elise and Colette knew each other pretty well from, previous relationship. But that's when we met, and, it led to the MLM. Everyone's done an MLM that they regret or they're embarrassed of, whatever. I'm
Especially
glad
in
we did
Utah.
though, because we literally would not be here if it wasn't for that little e-commerce business.
Totally. It's so true though, because like us doing that together led to us working out together, hanging out. We got our next jobs together. Like, that was a pivotal moment. As embarrassing as it is to admit that we dove headfirst into an MLM. I mean, there was one of those meetings, they call them a board plan, that we had like six people there. Like, we were
I'll be
trying it,
honest,
you know?
I'm not embarrassed about our efforts in the MLM itself. As far as that goes, I feel like we were pretty good at it. But I
Yeah,
think it didn't take very long for us to realize this isn't going anywhere. It
right.
was, it was cool to have something to have both of our, us and our wives have a focused effort towards. And the
Yeah,
interesting part, the reason we stayed in it it was only a couple months that we stayed in it, but the reason we did so long was because we were pretty good at it. Like you said, we
yeah,
were having success, but unfortunately, success in that world isn't actually success. So
right.
once we realized that, we bailed, we moved on. Why don't you talk about how you discovered cost segregation?
Yeah. So, I mean, took quite a few turns in life after that MLM because I graduated college. And I mean, just speaking of things that make no sense, I graduated in stats and then went into construction for a few years. So that's a totally natural path of progression. But, anyways, I ended up finding out that, you know what, I love building stuff, but I don't want to make a career out of it. I hated working with subs, I hated working with clients. You're kind of always like in the middle of everyone complaining at you. And I was like, I want to get out of construction. I'm looking for the next thing. And he was like, you should come interview with us. And I was like, what do you guys do? Come to find out, so this is my landlord. He and his brother-in-law started a cost segregation firm. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. He was like, it's kind of like in the real estate world, dealing with tax. Just come interview and see if you like it. And so I remember the day I interviewed over at their firm, I took another interview the same day with another construction company, big construction company on Instagram. Most people watching this would probably recognize the name. And so I kind of had this like, I interviewed at both, I got job offers at both, and I had to pick. And this was a huge moment because I was either going to stay in construction. Remember, we built a house in Heber. I was going to move up there to be closer to work because I was commuting all the time. And so it was like, do we sell the house and get out of construction, move back down to the valley and try something new? And we decided to go for it. So that's kind of the introduction to cost segregation. I applied for and accepted a job without even knowing what it was.
It's so interesting that you put it that way because that's exactly the position I was in. I was leaving a marketing agency that I had worked for a while. It was always meant to be more of a springboard job, internship style situation. And, I had kind of squeezed all the juice out of that situation. And I was looking for something. You had already started doing cost segregation. And very similar to you, I had interviewed at two different places. One of them was in the automotive industry. I'm really into cars, and I was excited about that. The other one was cost segregation, which I kind of just wanted as a backup because my friend worked there, Riley, and wanted to, have that just as another option. And I got offered the job at the automotive company and did the interview at the cost seg company the next day thinking, I'm just kind of gonna check the box of doing the interview. But and tell me how you feel about this. But the thing that was so interesting to me about cost segregation with having no prior knowledge at all of what it was before that interview was that this is a market that is so unsaturated. And, it's clearly got, gained some more traction since 2022 was when I took that interview. But at the time, it was like this new, exciting thing that still nobody had really even heard about. And there was potential to be one of the big players in the industry because of that, because it was this new world. If we could do something unique and different and pitch it well, could be something that absolutely explodes. And, working for a larger company in cost segregation immediately, a light bulb went off in my head of like, oh man, this is something that could be big. And I think we could do this for ourselves. And I think you and I had that vision very early on when we were working at the cost seg company.
Dude, I remember that because I remember I was trying to convince you to come interview with us. And there was it was kind of a hard conversation because I was initially on the operations side and you're more of a sales guy. So it was like, I don't want to come hire over there and do reports. I want to come sell, right? Which in and of itself, there was a huge opportunity at that firm to do too, right? So it was like, come try this new industry. I don't even remember how long after I started were we having this conversation. Do you remember?
Couple months. I'm pretty sure you started in February. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I started in July. So
Okay.
couple months.
Pretty quick after. But it was the same thing. I remember, especially coming from construction, the idea just caught on of like how huge this could be if you use the tools that they weren't even using at this firm, doing over 10 million a year. Because I remember going back to that conversation with my landlord, the way he kind of pitched the opportunity to me was like, how in construction you're reverse engineer or you're coming up with like a construction cost breakdown for this property, right? He's like, imagine if you could create that for an existing building and then turn that into 6-figure write-offs for most people, and they're only paying a few $1,000s to do it. Like, this was a huge opportunity right from the gate. And I was like, I don't know how this isn't like the biggest topic in accounting. Like, I had friends at BYU and other colleges that I was like, you're in accounting, have you ever heard of this? And they're like, I've literally never heard of this. Or we had a class where they kind of mentioned it. We were talking about depreciation. And I'm just like, there is no other tool that can impact a tax bill at this scale for the price that you're paying to do it. And just exactly like you said, dude, it seemed like you could literally 10x this company that we worked for, and there would still not even be half the market tapped to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and exactly like you said, I come from a sales background. I was excited about sales coming into cost segregation. And one of the interesting things that was said to me is rather than having to sell the product of cost segregation or the service, we're really more like consultants. We're really finding people to show them the opportunity that is cost segregation, and the numbers sell themselves. that's huge for me, especially when I was considering an automotive sales job to go sell used cars, which is the complete opposite end of the spectrum of like, nobody needs to buy a used car most of the time. And you're trying to force them into this box where the situation isn't great and they're going to have to take out a loan and have all these other fees and things that they don't want to have to pay for. But you need the commission, so you try to force the sale, right? What I learned so quickly with cost segregation is you don't have to force it. If it makes sense with their tax situation and with the properties that they own, there is no sales pitch. It's just consulting them and showing them, hey, this is the opportunity that you have to save this much money. And then you'd be an idiot not to do it. As long as your situation makes sense, it's done. And that's incredible from the sales side of things. And, obviously from the operations side of things, executing on that and just feeling good about what I do and working in an industry where like we're genuinely helping people save a ton of money. It's so nice coming from something. I sold software previously. I sold, medical testing supplies, things like that. And it's so nice to be somewhere where I don't feel like I'm selling somebody something when they don't actually need it. Every deal that we ever sign, they're going to benefit significantly from it and they actually need it, and that's just awesome.
Dude, I think one of the hugest gaps in like the world of tax strategy compared to cost segregation is when you engage with a cost seg firm, you're not paying to like strategize, right? There's a lot of this right now, especially it seems like there's such a fad, almost like a whole new industry in accounting where it's like, pay me a monthly retainer and I'll strategize with you. And that doesn't guarantee anything. It just guarantees that you get this guy's ear for a few extra hours a year and maybe he gives you some ideas and maybe they work, sure, but there's no guarantee that they will. With cost segregation, it's like input and direct output. You're literally, you're engaging a firm to do an appraisal, if you will, and you get instant gratification in your tax bill getting slashed by tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And like I said earlier, man, I just baffled that it's not a bigger industry already.
Yeah, and what I love about it too, obviously being an owner of a cost seg company at this point, and I want you to speak more to this because you would have more knowledge when it comes to this aspect of it than I would. But cost segregation in general is everything that we've been talking about as far as it's a huge opportunity. But there are still certainly levers you can pull to make your cost segregation product more beneficial than other products that would still fall under the umbrella of cost segregation, right? So talk to me about why we do it differently and how it might be more beneficial.
Sure. I'm going to get pretty granular in one specific example to illustrate this. So the process...
Let's get nerdy.
Yeah, let's get super nerdy. Put your nerdy cap on. The process involves taking an existing property most of the time. I mean, we do it all day long on a new property, but just for the vast majority of property owners out there, it'll go like this. We take your existing property that you bought for one purchase price, and then we reverse engineer that price into a construction cost breakdown. So we're trying to say, how much would it cost to rebuild this brand new today, right? So that would involve, like, let's take the flooring, for example. Carpet is something that depreciates faster than the building. And so part of doing the study, we're going to take a measurement of how much square footage of carpet is in your property. Let's take a Airbnb rental property, for example. How much, of the total property square footage, what percentage of it is carpet? And then we go to an IRS-backed, I don't know if backed is the right word, but an IRS-recognized construction estimator software that gives like SKU numbers, like they're called CSI codes, where it says across the whole United States, the average cost of a square footage of carpet of this type is like $2.73 or whatever, right? So we're just starting with, you have 2,000 square foot of carpet in your house and it costs an average of $4 a square foot at, this type of carpet across the nation. That's like an average. And then, that's a good starting point. We're going to pull that number out of your basis to depreciate over 5 years. Where the secret sauce happens is the further adjustments up and down to make that carpet number make more sense and get you bigger deductions. So for example, we're going to account for the fact that your Airbnb might be on Miami Beach instead of Idaho, or Your property might be constructed only a year or two ago instead of 40 years ago, right? You might have owned the property for a few years versus a few decades, right? We're going to account for all these things that's going to dial it in to where, if you're just using the raw estimate, it might say, oh, your carpet is worth like 15 grand in this home. What if I can go and argue that it's actually 18 grand or 24 grand, and that number still makes sense in the grand scheme of your cost breakdown? That's where the secret sauce is in us being able to, in an audit defensible way, increase the value that's allocated to all the interior finish work and the landscaping that gets you bigger deductions while still leaving enough in the building to pass an audit, essentially, to be a reasonable amount left over in the basis. That's where the secret sauce is.
And we're talking big numbers here. You think about a purchase price, on average, couple million dollars, or residentials, maybe a little less than that. But still, we typically find somewhere around 30% of the basis, which is just the purchase price with the land value taken out of it, the amount of money that we're able to depreciate within the property. So it's a significant amount of money. So having somebody that's going to do everything they can to justify those numbers being a little bit higher in a way that the IRS would approve anyway is extremely significant. And
Totally.
cost segregation, for me was very confusing at first when someone was explaining to me like a rough breakdown, kind of what you just said. If you would have told me that before I had worked in the industry at all, I'd been like, first of all, what are you talking about? Depreciation, basis, I don't know what any of that is. But really,
Yeah.
once you know a few of the key terms, basis again being purchase price with land value taken out, depreciation being, how quickly the IRS recognizes the property's value going down just by sense of how long the property has been yours, as the taxpayer. Once you understand those few things, this makes so much sense. It makes so
Yeah.
much sense that the carpet, the cupboards, the countertops, the specialty lighting, the window coverings wouldn't last as long as the shell of the building itself, the actual wood and drywall and, shell components of the property. So
Yeah.
it's just awesome. I'm just stoked that we landed in the industry that we did, and it's cool how we got here, like you were saying.
Yeah. And speaking of the secret sauce, I would say what makes us or another firm special, like those secret sauce items we were just talking about, actually end up also being extra protection for your cost seg study. Because we've seen since we've come out, there's a lot of like DIY softwares or real estate accountants that kind of like learn a little bit about the space, and you end up getting cost seg studies that are using percentages, rule of thumb approach, right? Where it's like, oh, you bought this rental property, we're just going to say 15% is 5 year and 10% is 15 year and just send it, and that will absolutely fail in an audit. So it's kind of like a double dipping benefit by working with a specialist. You get the added benefit of bigger deductions because they're actually estimating it appropriately for your property, but it's also more defensible because there's a real method tied to those estimates, right? So
Yeah. And to speak to the secret sauce on the sales side of things, the conversations that I'm having that I think separate one cost seg company from another is one, transparency, and that's true with anything in the sales world, especially when it's something that you're trying to sell that other people aren't going to be an expert in. Again, going back to the automotive analogy, people have done their research on what cars they like, what motors in them, what color they want, things like that. With cost segregation, nobody has any idea what they're talking about when they come to us and say, hey, my CPA mentioned cost segregation, can you help me out with that? So they're putting a lot of trust in the firm that they choose to know that they're going to do all the things that you're saying, that they're actually going to take care of them. They're going to find as much benefit as possible, and they're not going to do something that's just waving a giant red flag to the IRS, right? And that's what I love on our end of things, and that's why I can feel good about my job, is because I'm it doesn't hurt me at all to be fully transparent in the sense of like, this is how much we're going to find you. If another company is saying they're going to find you more, or if they're using round numbers or using percentages, that might be red flag. Not that you can't get a study done with them, but if they are taking a rule of thumb approach, and what's tricky is a rule of thumb approach is technically recognized by the IRS as a way that you can do a study, right?
Yeah.
But you don't realize the potential penalty from doing that. And if you are to get audited, that, it could be a huge problem. And these people
Yeah.
have no idea. So,
Yeah. Yeah. The IRS is basically going to conduct their own study based on their 380-page audit technique guide for cost segregation. And they're going to say, well, here's our results and here's your results. And there's a huge gap. So either defend it or we're just going to replace it with ours, right? That's a great point. So what happened? I mean, how do we get here today? Because we kind of talked about getting to that firm that we both worked at. What was like the next part of the timeline?
yeah, well, I can tell you from my perspective, I started working for that cost seg company, started selling cost segregation, and immediately felt like I found what was going to be my career for the rest of my life. I knew in the back of my mind, like I mentioned, that I might want to do this for myself one day because immediately it was something I was good at. I was having a lot of success. We enjoyed working. It wasn't hard going into work every day, other than some of the politics that come with being an employee, just in the sense of
Yeah.
we're building somebody else's dream, and that was the only part of the puzzle that was missing. Right? Is if we could find a way to do this for ourselves, then that would be everything that I've ever wanted, right? And I think I can speak for you in saying the same thing as well. And honestly, it's weird. I don't know if you want to call it luck. I don't know if you want to call it, just as a result of the circumstance. Things got a little bit bumpy for you. I'll let you talk about that a little bit more. And that's kind of what led us to being like, okay, this timeline might be sped up a little bit faster than we might be comfortable with.
Sure. Yeah. We definitely joined this company at a very pivotal time for them. I think we mentioned earlier they were doing somewhere around 10 million a year when we both joined, which was huge. I mean, I think I was
And with no
employed
signs of slowing down.
right. They were just it was like more than 30 to 40% growth every year. And I think I was employee number 36 or something like that. I can't remember honestly, but the very next summer, they had private equity get involved. Because remember, this firm was started with just a dad, his son, and his brother-in-law, which was my landlord, just a family shop, right? And so they decided to get private equity involved because they wanted to scale this thing. And, where the road got bumpy for me was my expectations for how I wanted to be involved and impact this company were just very different because I was more concerned with improving processes over time and like extending the reach of the company versus it seemed like private equity was just all they cared about was scaling, right? They just wanted to throw bodies at it. And so there was just a disconnect. I mean, I'll admit it. There was a disconnect in what I expected my job to turn into versus what my boss expected my job to turn into. And we kind of just clashed. And there was a moment where the department that I kind of managed was dissolved and regrouped with everyone else who was doing the reports. And I was like, you know what? I've got this really cool skill set we had done thousands of studies and me personally, hundreds by myself, not to mention the fact that my team reviewed every single study that went out. I was like,
Well,
I have this.
not to interrupt you, but I think it's important that you say that, you were the quality control manager. So you were involved in every aspect of what happens within the study to the point of
Yeah.
being able to identify if there's a little tiny error within it. So you were very uniquely qualified to understand all of the depths of what cost segregation is from the operations perspective.
Yeah. I wish I could show you the huge textbook that we used to reference all the tax code. It's like 1,400 page. It's called the U.S. Master Depreciation Guide. It's like a fat brick of a book. And that was like our Bible in the quality control department.
Well, and I can vouch for yours specifically, having hundreds of colored tabs sticking out of
Yeah,
the side of it where you're making notes in that thing. You studied that thing harder than probably anybody ever has. So
dude.
that,
And it was
that's one of the
worth
things
it.
that told me that if I ever do go do cost segregation, this is the guy I need to do it with because I have not personally, I'm just the dumb sales guy, right? I just can BS with the best of them. And I know what I'm good at and I know what I need my business partner to be good at. And that worked out really well for us that you happen to be that guy.
Dude, studying that thing ended up being worth it. That was where we discovered that you could convert a primary use home into a rental property and still qualify for bonus if it all happened within, the window. That was like a pivotal change for all of our residential rental studies, because we joined this company in the thick of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Prime bonus years were between 2018 and 2022, and this was kind of right in that window. So,
well, and how cool that you got to bring that revelation forward to a $10 million plus company and be like, hey, I found this little group of text that changes everything for our clients. Like, that's awesome.
That's where, like, we say, if someone's asking what's the difference from one firm to the other, or, when we say no two studies are alike, it really just comes down to, is the cost seg provider up to date with the most recent tax code changes? Like, are you actually depreciating gas stations and car washes over 15 years and getting bonus on that? Are you actually getting bonus to primary use conversions? Like, there's so many. I'll spare you the boredom of me nerding out on these topics, but that's really even like the cherry on top of the secret sauce, is being aware of the tax code changes that affect cost segregation, not just the cost seg methods. And that's ultimately where the disconnect happened, was, it no longer seemed profitable to the company and the private equity that I was exploring, ways to optimize our process. And I get it, that's not a scalable process. And so we kind of just went separate ways. I ended up leaving that firm, and I think it was in April, or I think it was May, because it was right after the tax deadline that year, because you guys did that trip. And then by August, I'm kind of jumping a gap here, but by August, I was servicing my very first cost seg client under my own name. So that was a pretty wild change. Long story short, we decided, because we were living in Utah at the time, but I was born and raised in Arizona. We decided, hey, we just had our second kid. Let's move back home, be closer to family, and we'll open up our own shop. And it was a super rocky process. Oh my gosh, it was. We're a few years into this thing, and I feel like I have no idea what we're doing. It was even worse back in that year, dude. It was like, what do you mean there's a domain and there's email inbox reputations? I can't just blast 10,000 emails out. What are you talking about? What do you mean?
I want to get back to that. I want to get into all of that stuff, but to catch up to where you're at in the timeline, from my perspective, as soon as Riley left, obviously we're best friends at this point. We talk every single day. And so I knew, and we had talked about, starting our own company for years at this point. We knew what we were going to do. We knew this was going to happen at some point. I wasn't exactly prepared for it to happen as quickly as it did, but when everything that happened with Riley, like he explained, it just, happened, all of a sudden I realized, oh, this is going to happen now. It has to happen now for Riley, because he needs a job. And, we both knew you weren't going to go, work somewhere else as an employee. We knew if we were going to do this, now would be the time to do this. So watching you, it was scary for me, right? I was making more money than I thought I ever would at that point in my life, and was like, I do want to go start a firm. I want to go work with Riley. So as soon as you left, the switch flipped for me. It was like, okay, let's make as much money as we possibly can for the next couple months. And sometime here shortly, it's going to be time for me to make that jump. So that actually worked out pretty well.
I have to cut you off here because you're being a little modest about your performance at that company. To really understand how hard this was for Jake to leave, within the very first month, as a sales assistant, Jake sent out and closed more proposals than anyone ever had in 1 month in the entire company. And within I can't remember how long it took them to make you a real salesperson in your job title. But ever since that month, which was like 2 or 3 months into you having a job there, you were always in first place in the leaderboard for monthly sales. I mean, it was like 6 figures a month, just servicing clients. And to be faced with a decision that we both weren't ready for. I definitely forced us into that, but to be faced with having to make that decision of, do I give up all this earning potential, working a decade established book of business to start something on our own? That was a huge risk that you took.
I think everybody has to take it at some point to start a business, and it's honestly so interesting the way that it happened too, because I jumped in blind. I had no idea honestly what you guys had built. I trusted you and our other partner that you had built something that I could come do what I was doing at that cost seg firm for ourselves, right? Um, but had I known what I knew a month into us starting, at Layne, I probably wouldn't have made the decision. So it's good that it was uninformed to some extent, right? Because like you said, I got really lucky, honestly. A lot of it was just the time that we happened to start working there that cost segregation was exploding from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So I kind of just rode that wave and got lucky. Um, so I had quite a bit of success. It was scary, but to be where we're at now and to have gone through everything that we, went through in our first year of business is just crazy. It's wild to think about. I honestly can't believe that we're here and
Yeah.
everything that we just talked about even happened. It all feels like it was just a dream. The
Yeah.
past, what, I guess from the time we were doing the MLM in Provo, it's been what, almost 10 years at this point? 8
Yeah.
years? Crazy.
Yeah. Dude, so much has changed since then. Should we go through like the timeline of starting this thing up?
Yeah, might as well.
Because I think that's a hilarious story that I would imagine most entrepreneurs could relate to, just like the sheer blindness of you don't know what you don't know and just being absolute idiots, but somehow we sold $1 million in a year. Like that's crazy. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I left the previous firm right before the summer, uh, came down and started kind of trying to build out my own product. I had started like working with my dad. He's been in commercial real estate his whole life. So I was kind of starting to like, okay, what's the next thing? And I was like, I have to build this. So started trying to work on my own version of like a report generator, right? Like can't call it a software, basically just building out an Excel spreadsheet that could build cost seg reports, how I knew how to do them. And got super lucky with my first client in August. Ended up being someone that had invested in a property with my dad. I won't shy away from the fact that who you know definitely lands you some business, especially in this industry. And then later that summer, you mentioned our other business partner, his name's Coy. I saw that Coy had posted on LinkedIn that he was kind of looking for his next opportunity as well. And what's funny enough is Coy left the same exact cost seg firm that we both worked at a month or two after I left. And then he went and got, some coding certifications. I think he did JavaScript courses and all that because he wanted to go into development. And he just posted, hey, I just got these certifications. I majored in this and all that. I'm looking for my next opportunity. If you hear anything, let me know. And I called him and I was like, you'll never guess what, but I'm trying to start a cost seg firm. Do you want to join me? And we were just two young, dumb idiots not knowing what we were doing, but we built a product. Coy was pivotal. He was huge in closing the gap in our product becoming what it is today. While I could go and start trying to drum up some sales. I think we ended up doing like 60 grand in Q4 that first year, which, hey, coming from basically a $60,000 salary job, never owning a company before, that felt like a big thing, like we just started this, we made 60 grand on our own accord. That was before you even joined, like no sales efforts at all. I'm pretty impressed. And then,
Absolutely.
so we started talking with you in the first quarter of the following year, right?
Yeah, so I obviously was keeping tabs on the situation throughout, from May through the end of that year. Obviously, I'd heard Coy had joined you at that point. And the two people I think that anybody would say, if you could handpick two people at the firm that we worked on to work with on your own cost segregation company, it would be Riley and Coy for sure. Just as far as, people you can trust, people who know what they're doing, and the skill sets of what you did and what Coy did at that other company, it was perfect. And I honestly knew at this point that until that was completely built and the concept was proven and everything was kind of ready for me to come in as a sales guy, again, that's all I know how to do. I wouldn't have been able to contribute to building all the back end stuff like you're talking about. So I knew we needed to wait for the right time. But like you said, you guys had quite a bit of success through the end of the year. Beginning of 2020, what, three? No, 2024. Beginning of 2024, I think that time came, right? And you guys had sold quite a few studies. You had proven that you could do this, you could generate the reports, you had a viable product that was going to work. So at that point, I was like, okay, let's have a conversation. And, I'm going to come work with you guys and we're going to do what we always talked about doing. And that was
Yeah.
leap day of 2024 was when we made the decision.
And dude, speaking of lessons learned in business, like I don't know how I would answer this today if someone were to come and ask, like, okay, as a startup, what's the balance between building the product and the back end, like getting a proof of concept and selling? Because we did not sell enough before we brought you on. Like there was no sales effort. It was just reaching out to people that I knew, friends and family stuff, people in my neighborhood who owned properties. Like it was not a scrappy sales effort at all. And looking back, it's easy to have the hindsight of like, man, I wish I would have just like done nothing but sales and had Coy build the back end. But like, where's the balance of how long do you spend on the product before you start selling it? And what should that first sales effort look like? Because I don't know how I would change it if we were to go rewind the clock and start over. But I definitely know that I would start selling sooner, because that was.
I think it was a unique scenario, especially for you, because you're the only one that ever had a foot in both worlds as far as operations and sales. So when you started the company, you didn't have Coy at that point. So you started building everything that you needed to build to be able to provide a cost segregation study once you sold one. So you were already kind of working on that side of things. So it's hard to pull away from that and then say, okay, I'm only going to do sales now when you've just built this baby of yours, right? So I completely understand why that would happen. We certainly saw it happen on the sales side of things where you guys, had some success at the deadline, the extension deadline of 2023, but then 2024 came around, turn of the new year came around, there was nothing in the pipeline. When I started, there was nothing. And it's because you had to work on the business instead of, in sales and, to no fault of your own, but that was the reality that we were in, right? So I came in, I think it was, again, kind of perfect timing where you had sold some studies, you've gone through the full process with, $50,000 worth of studies. And we were at a point where we're basically starting from scratch in, March of 2023.
Yeah, it really did feel like scratch. I mean, luckily though, that time happened to be right when, we picked a CRM, we kind of figured out our system, our product was dialed in to be, I can't say automated, but like, we had a special button you could push in Excel that would make a report. Like it was, it felt a little more than just a basic spreadsheet. And I can't think of better timing. I mean, sure, we probably would have made more money if we brought you on in 2023 versus waiting for the turn of the new year. Like we were probably ready enough to turn on the open the hose of sales. But I agree with you. I think we were poised a little bit better by the time you came on to just say, okay, Jake, show us how it's done. Like I need to focus on this with you, get me to come out of operations so I can learn how to sell better. And
it also needed to make sense for it. The timeline needed to end at the other cost seg firm as well. Luckily, they really helped me. They kind of pushed me out in the sense, just like you said, when private equity comes in, they like to change everything. One of those things was commission rates being cut like it always is. So it worked out really well because, in 2023, when you guys were building this, I was still doing really well. It would have been really hard for me to turn away, the success I was having there. As soon as
Yeah.
the new year started, they were implementing all of these changes, and it was perfect timing. So it worked out really well. Yeah, I could have stayed. I could have continued to make a little bit more money for a little bit longer at the cost seg firm, but we would just be putting off what we built at Layne, right? So
Yeah.
you have to make the jump at some point, take the risk, and that's so hard to do. I think for any business ever, it's so hard to go from this comfortable life where I'm working as an employee, but I'm making good money to I'm going to turn away all of that and take a risk and bet on me, bet
Yeah.
on us. And thank goodness we did. But holy cow, it was a bumpy ride for a little while.
Dude, I remember that conversation. It was like I was pacing around our backyard on the phone with you because I was in Arizona, you were in Utah, and it was like, I really want you to come down. I can only pay you 18% commission on what you sell. I mean, we'll give you some equity, but it was like throw away your salary, throw away, the stability of like a bonus structure and a proven book of business. Come and get scrappy and work commission only, and let's see what we can do. So, I mean, props to you for believing in us and believing in yourself and taking that jump. Like you said, if you want to get out of the rat race, you kind of have to just take that jump. But I'm
Well,
super
I
glad
mean,
we
to
did
speak
because
to,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say to speak to the benefit of building your own thing versus being an employee. I did the math in my head. If I made 18% commission only on what I had sold at this other firm the past year, it would have been so much more money than I made. And, I made really good money. So, like,
Yeah.
it was definitely scary, but at the same time, I knew I could do it. I'd been doing it, right? I didn't exactly have all of this infrastructure behind me at the firm other than leads, and leads are very important, obviously.
Yeah.
But other than that, I knew we could do everything else ourselves. We just needed to find how to get leads and do the dirty work of cold calling and building up a book of business, and
Yeah.
that just takes time, like it does with
Yeah.
any industry.
I remember especially the time when you came in, like we wanted to do this right from the start. Like we wanted, to make sure everything was kosher. I didn't call any clients that I had worked with at the other firm. Like we wanted to make sure we weren't doing anything that would have gotten us in trouble. So it was like, not only can you not rely on your old pay structure, but you got to just forget your old contacts too. Like we're starting from scratch. And that's where like we fried our primary domain right off the bat because I didn't know that you need to have like different email domains for outreach and whatever. Like, that's one specific example of lessons learned as a new business owner. But, it really, like you said earlier, it was like starting from scratch. But it ended up turning out good because we like quintupled or 6x'd our revenue that year, right? Compared to the year before. I mean, granted, we started in August, but I think we did like, what was it, 320,000 in 2024?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you can just say since making the decision to make the jump within 2 years, we'd be selling over $1 million a year, and with no sign of slowing down and doing much more than that, even at this point, is incredible. And,
Yeah.
like you were saying, as far as having to start from scratch, we had a lot of eyes on us because, I mean, think about it. 3 people that came from the same firm went and started their own firm who were really well connected with all the employees that were still at the old firm. So, there were definitely some hard feelings, some gossip going around, some accusations of things that, never happened. And all of that we had to deal with as this new firm, being scared that we're going to get sued, and how can we prove that we're doing this the right way, like you're saying. But it's hard, and I feel like anytime that we had success, all that was telling them was they must be doing something wrong. They must be doing something that could be grounds for us to sue them, and that wasn't the case at all. And to be honest, like I think all of us agree that we are grateful for our experience at that firm. We're grateful for everything that they did for us. It's a bummer that some of the relationships turned the way that they did just because of, gossip and things that don't really matter. But that's
Yeah.
going to happen. It's kind of just the price you pay when you go out on your own.
Yeah. It's like I was just telling you the other day, the guy who started that firm that we worked at, he should hold his head high as like his greatest trophy is that he created like 10 entrepreneurs from his company. I mean, there's been so many spin-offs of people who have gone and tried to do their own thing, whether it's like the energy credit stuff or, you know, the 263A stuff or cost seg even. We've seen a few branch off firms that all sprouted from the same company. And that just, you know, back to what you said about the opportunity that this is, I think going back to 2023, I could probably name like 4 or 5 other firms that I knew even did cost segregation. Beyond that, it was like, oh yeah, the big 4, you know, they have departments that do them. But now today, there's been an absolute explosion thanks to some of the really huge changes that have happened in recent tax years, just in terms of, you know, the tax or the big beautiful bill, bringing bonus depreciation back, AI. You know, I feel like all these advancements, there's been an absolute explosion of cost seg providers, which is scary because, you know, not only is it hard to find clients who even know what cost seg is, but then to help them understand that there's a difference between cost seg providers, even more so now that there's all these competing firms. It's really made our job pretty interesting. And I feel like, man, we timed it right. Like we
Absolutely.
really caught like the second wave of cost segregation post Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where we were kind of established as bonus depreciation came back. And that's really helped us, you know, carry a heavier name in the space.
Well, and what a wild 2 statements to have back to back that you just said. One of them being there's cost segregation firms popping up all over the place, and the next one being nobody knows what cost segregation is. Like it's the weirdest dynamic, and it's so true. I still talk to CPAs every day that are like, well, what is that? That sounds too good to be true. That you're gonna get audited. You're gonna, you know, it's got to be a red flag to the IRS. But there's also so many providers. So I think what it is, it proves the point that we talked about in the beginning that this is such a new thing still. You know, there are a lot of firms now, but I mean, a lot is still nothing compared to most other industries. So there is competition at all, you know, compared to not really having any when we first started. So, you know, I think it's good in the sense that it's spreading awareness of what cost segregation is, which is only going to be good for us. But of course, that comes with having other firms that, you know, hopefully there are firms that are providing good studies and doing everything well, but there's certainly going to be some that are a little bit less, you know, you're not getting quite as good of a study from some people for sure.
Definitely. So speaking of, just you mentioned some conversations that we have often with like CPAs and stuff. What would you say are kind of some of the main things that come up that people say are reasons they don't want to do it or maybe scared to do it? Like, maybe like what are people afraid of with cost segregation in general?
I think the first one is just a general fear of taking as much benefit in a tax year as cost segregation can create for you, right? Finding something that can give you $100,000 worth of depreciation, which, you know, yields tens of thousands of dollars of tax savings. There's nothing else like this in the tax code that can allow you to create this big of a tax deduction, right? There really isn't anything else. So by nature of just it being as good and as beneficial as it is, that's the number one thing that people are scared of is that just sounds too good to be true. And it's crazy. And I mean, good at the same time that is the biggest fear is this too good to be true? But there are other things that, because it's such an unknown industry, there are, you know, buzzwords that scare people. Things like recapture depreciation, things like you're just gonna have to pay all of that back once you sell the property. You know, and to be honest, one of the great things about my job is there's an answer for all of these, right? Recapture depreciation is not something you need to be scared of as long as you're in the right situation where a cost seg study will make sense in the first place. And obviously that's something that we talk with the clients about on a case by case basis. But if they are the right type of investor where they buy properties, they hold them, they're not just doing a quick flip, and you know they're trying to continue to invest and build their portfolio, there's nothing else out there that's going to be as powerful of a tool as cost segregation. So the pros certainly outweigh the cons, but you know, I would say just a lack of knowledge of cost segregation in general is certainly the number one hurdle that we have to get over.
Yeah. The other one I hear a lot too is like, even if you even if we generate you a 6-figure deduction, you can't use it all because of either like you don't qualify for the short-term rental loophole, or you're not a real estate professional. Those are some big buzzwords in the space, and that's primarily the main reason why we do all of our due diligence for free. Like, we'll talk with somebody and their CPA in depth about their situation to really understand, can you or can't you deduct all of these deductions. But at the very least, you're getting basically a interest-free loan from the IRS, right? Because like, say you don't qualify for the passive activity loss rules or whatever. At the very least, you're banking a massive amount of depreciation to just write off that property's income year after year after year until it expires. Like, it doesn't, there's no penalties for the carryover. There's no expiration date. It's just like, here's this bank of deductions. We're going to just erase your tax liability on this property for 5-10 years, right? That's like worst case scenario, right? Obviously, best case scenario is you're using depreciation from one property to offset other forms of income, and that's what we help you qualify for as well. I mean, we can get way into the nitty gritty of real estate professional and short-term rentals and all that stuff too, but I would say that's one of the most common objections, if you will, that I hear talking to people is just, can I even use the deductions? And I say, absolutely you can, without me even having to hear your tax situation. I know you can use the deductions in some manner. And like I said, at the very least, you're deferring your taxable income on that property for years.
Well, and to speak to that, I mean, the most important thing, like you said, is as long as you're someone who can take advantage of cost segregation in the first place, right? A lot of negativity that I hear when people are talking about cost segregation comes from them simply not being in a position where they can take advantage of it. It's like
Yeah.
someone who says, car insurance is a scam when they never had a car in the first place to insure. Right.
Right.
So as long as you're a real estate investor that's bought it recently, they can take advantage of it. It almost always makes sense. Like you're saying, worst case scenario, they might not be able to take hundreds of thousands of dollars in the first year where they can utilize bonus depreciation because their tax liability might not be in a situation where they have that much that they need to offset. But if they do, or even if they don't, the benefit still far outweighs the fee that you're going to pay for the study, and everything that goes along with getting it done. So I think, education is the most important thing. To that point, I think we should say we're going to be doing this weekly. Riley and I are going to jump on a call like this. We would want as many of you as possible to jump on here and ask any questions that you might have about cost segregation. We want to provide an open platform for people to just learn more about it. Really just want to use this as an opportunity to network, opportunity to meet people, hopefully save some people some money. And, like you said, just get out there.
Yep.